Hello, hello, my beloved waking gods and goddesses. Welcome to Love, Truth, and Beauty. Maria West here, and this is episode 407 and my 22nd installment of the video series Conversations with Men. And today I have with me a very, very special man, a man who I consider one of my very rare and very few conscious masculine voices of reason. And here he is in the flesh on the Zoom, of course, Mark Certo. Mark, welcome. Thank you so much for being here with me.
What a nice introduction. Thank you very much. And the
You're
pleasure
welcome.
is mine, Maria. I'm really looking forward to our chat.
Me as well. And as I was saying earlier, you and I have been connected, me more peripherally with the Monroe Institute and Robert A. Monroe, the author of Journeys Out of the Body, Out of the
Mhm.
Body, and you as his sound engineer.
Mhm.
Holy moly. I would love for you to tell us a little bit about that story because it's amazing and I want to hear it from you.
It's 13 years worth of my life experience. That's going to be a long story.
Hi,
Excuse me.
puppy.
Do you want to say hello?
Yes, I do. Let's
This is
see.
Trina, and she's a
Hi,
whiner until she
Trina.
gets what she
Oh,
wants.
are you a
Um,
whiner? Yeah, she's
she is. She is. She's very vocal. So I had no idea who Bob Monroe was when we met. I had a recording studio in Charlottesville, Virginia. I'm a recording engineer by training. I got the impulse to move to Charlottesville from God knows where. I came to visit it. It seemed like a nice place. My first wife and I looked at the area and said, let's move from New York City to Charlottesville. And we did.
wow.
My plan was to start a recording studio, and that happened in a couple of years. I managed to do that after moving. Went to the Abbey Road studios in London and came back from my trip there. And this was 1987. So I had a answering machine and I was checking through all of my recordings of, messages left by potential clients. And amidst all these youthful voices of musicians who wanted to book a session with me, there was an older guy and he simply said, call Bob Monroe, and he left a number. And I thought he just kind of, was an old guy who left a message on somebody's answering machine and didn't really understand that he was calling a recording studio. So after I talked to all of my other potential clients, I called Mr. Monroe back and I said, Mr. Monroe, this is Mark Certo from Radio Link Productions. As I have a recording studio in town. You left a message on my machine. Did you mean to call me? And he kind of sat there and quiet for a moment and goes, oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. And then he said, can you mix to zero VU, which is recording engineering speak for can you make a recording without distortion? And I said, I wouldn't be much of a recording engineer if I couldn't. And he told me he had a recording studio in a place called Nelly's Ford, Virginia, and asked if I would come to have lunch with him and meet him. And I did. And he was, an unusual character, very friendly, very nice. Turned out that we shared a lot in common with our love for music and engineering and broadcasting, and both lived in New York City for a long time. I grew up there. And then I tried to ask him what it was that he was doing in his lab, but he was very, which is where the recording studio he had was. And he was very kept his cards kind of close to his chest, didn't really want to tell everything that was going on. So he kind of talked around the issue a bit. And then finally he said to me something that made me go, oh, it's like silver mind control, what you're doing, meditation and
Yeah.
reprogram. He said, you know about this stuff? And I said, oh, yeah, I've been doing meditation since I'm like 16 years old. I was maybe 26 at that time, 27.
Mhm.
And so I'd been doing it for almost 10 years. And he said, well, you ought to do really well here. Then that began a 13-year long career in friendship where we explored
Wow.
the mysteries of consciousness and reverse engineered EEG readings of people in anomalous states and tried to come to some conclusions and improve the process that he developed all the way back in the early 50s or mid 50s and
Yes, the
proceeded
mid
ever since.
50s. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I
So
believe
that was how I
his
met Bob.
his first book chronicled his first experiences
Yes,
in that 50s and 60s, perhaps. And
that's
then
right.
all the subsequent books afterwards. I mean, just this amazing autobiographical journey, so to speak.
Yeah, and if you knew Bob personally, you would come to understand he wasn't a mystic at all. He wasn't even mystically bent. He was
Mhm.
very pragmatic.
Yeah, a
He was a
businessman.
businessman, right? Exactly. Had a love for engineering, had a love for music. So he was artistic. He produced radio programs when radio was king back in the 40s and 50s, so he kind of made his fortune doing that. And when he had his out of body experiences, it kind of threw him for a loop. He didn't know what to do with that information. So he started doing some medical and psychiatric tests in order to find out whether or not he was sane or dying, insane or dying. Turned out he wasn't. And he came upon one doc who said, you might want to look into some of this Eastern mysticism stuff. They talk about this sort of thing. And Bob was like, I live on Madison Avenue in New York City. And, I'm a professional. I'm not going to go live in an ashram. So he started doing some research into what was then referred to as PSI research,
Mhm.
where people at the Menninger Foundation and at Stanford Research Institute were looking into consciousness anomalies. And he befriended Charles Tart, who's not only a prolific author and another mentor of mine, but was very involved in psi research and was one of the fathers, or if not the founder, of depth psychology. A brilliant guy who just recently passed away, and it breaks my heart when I think about it. Um, and Charlie got him to pay attention to his experiences, his out of body experiences, and journal them in a kind of way that would help him make sense out of the experiences. And he integrated that into his own side research and got in touch with the folks involved in the remote viewing community who were just, all of that was all very hush hush at the time. And Bob became a part of that community to a degree and started the Monroe Institute of Applied Sciences as a result. And eventually got too old and limited to be able to mix and hear what he needed to do to create his recordings. So that's how we got involved with each other. It's
That is
it's quite a story, but
amazing.
yeah, but Bob was very pragmatic. He wasn't
Mhm.
some new age guru or anything like that. As
Yeah.
a matter of fact, he eschewed that whole thing. Was
And that makes
curious
it
about it though.
better. That makes it better to me.
It was better for me too, because growing up in New York City, the word bullshit came into my mind pretty early. And I just, I saw a lot of these consciousness raising human
Mhm.
potential type
Yes.
organizations springing up. It was more so on the West Coast than it was on the East, but it was
Yes.
starting. And, the whole cult mentality and all of that just
Oh,
didn't
yeah.
appeal to me.
Yeah.
But I had enough experiences in consciousness anomalies, lucid
Mhm.
dreams, for instance. Hadn't had an out of body experience by that point in time, but transcendental experiences through
Mhm.
my meditation practice that made me wonder what was going on. There was something going on, and I was curious about that.
Yeah. And
So
we're
finding
from
Bob
the
was a real
same
blessing.
generation.
We
So
are.
we were in that, I call it that consciousness soup
Mm-hmm.
of discovery.
Right.
You know, I did my drugs early
Mm-hmm.
and realized really need drugs to do these things where I was exploring and going beyond the boundaries. So
Right.
for me, the out of body experiences were very they were very real in that I had a very traumatic war zone of a family life, my upbringing. And
Hmm.
so out of body experiences was actually a welcomed tool for me to like, kind of escape or to alter my reality such that my life could be bearable, that my
Hmm.
life could somehow have a different trajectory other than what was actually going on. So I learned how
Yeah.
to split my realities very, very early. So
Hmm.
I'm telling you, reading that book when I was 12, Monroe's first book, it was a life changer for me. So
Hmm.
I'm curious about your experience with the dreams because you do a lot of dream work and
Hmm.
also your experiences with exploring meditation, which I think is just so critical in being able to shut off all the exterior noise
Hmm.
and distractions that would try to pull us and yank us into many, many different directions that are perhaps, not so productive or not so good.
Well, that is a very large topic because we're talking about consciousness there and
Mhm.
consciousness anomalies. So, if we break it down, first of all, I want to validate that your out of body experiences invoked through trauma response
Mhm.
are quite normal. That
Yes.
happens a lot. If I had a nickel for every time I've heard that as a
Yeah.
means of escapism or a
Mhm.
form of dissociation, I would be a very wealthy man. But I didn't make my money through collecting stories. um, the trauma response is only part of the picture. Other people, like Bob, did not have any notable trauma, nor did he covet a form of escapism.
Mhm.
Bob was a glider pilot, okay, and that was his. I don't know. I call it his passion, among other things. He liked to be up there, and that experience of being of the physical limitations of gravity, I think, appealed to him very much on a psychic level. So maybe that played into how his out of body experiences came about. He had actual experience as a pilot, and felt the freedom of it and loved it. But the vibrational experiences that he had, that if you don't know the story, your audience, Bob would lay down for a nap and he would feel these vibrations. And that's what precipitated his discomfort with going to sleep. It's like he didn't know what these vibrations were.
Mhm.
One day he kind of let the vibrations happen, and just he got used to them. He realized nothing was physically wrong with him. And he was thinking about what it would be like the following day to go gliding. And the next thing he knew, he was out of his body. That made him wonder. All right. That precipitated a lot of questions for him, precipitates a lot of questions for me. I am an avid lucid dreamer and have been for a long time. First question that arises, is a lucid dream an out of body experience or vice versa? Is an
Mhm.
out of body experience a form of lucid dreaming? The answer is maybe. We don't really know.
Yeah.
Bob would be going to sleep, hit the hypnagogic state, and then ride the wave of these vibrations as they arose. And the results were his experiences that he journaled in his book. The thing about out of body experiences are they're very old. The
Mhm.
notion is very old, right? I mean, the Indian mystics had talked about, astral travel for millennia, couple
Mhm.
millennia.
Yes.
People who've had religious experiences seem to not be in their body when they're having it. They're in contact with entities. I don't know what else to call them. We'll just call
Yes.
them entities presences
Mm-hmm.
that are not physical, and they have experiences that are mind bending and transforming. Like I don't know if you know the story of Saint Paul, or Saul of Tarsus, more accurately, in the Christian tradition. He's walking on the road to Damascus, has some sort of episode, sees Jesus, who he never met before. It's like 30 or so years after Christ died. And this vision of Christ simply says to him, "Why are you persecuting me?" And this zealot, who at the time, was fighting against the Romans and didn't like the whole emerging Christian movement, was a tax collector, I believe, had a complete change in mindset and became Saint Paul, an
Mm-hmm.
evangelist. Proceeded to walk like 16,000 miles back and forth from Rome to Judea to spread the word of Christianity. That's a life transforming experience.
Indeed.
Was it an out of body experience? Maybe. Was it a lucid dream brought on by some kind of trauma? I have no idea. I don't. So, what I can say about out of body experiences is that they are an anomaly. People try to have them consciously because they want the experience of knowing that consciousness survives physical death. They want to entertain themselves. They want to escape reality. Whatever the reason is, people want these experiences, they chase after it.
Mm-hmm.
And Bob Monroe created a system for people to explore consciousness, which may or may not lead to out of body experiences. So let's define how
Yes.
Bob Monroe talked about out of body experiences. Let me know if you have any questions as I go
Okay,
along
I,
here.
I will. I'm following you.
Okay.
I love it.
Okay. So Bob defined the out of body experience as an experience that can happen beyond without physical sensory input. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now we have to kind of break it down and think about the nature of experience, which could lead into information and all the things you were curious about earlier. How do we know that we exist?
Mm-hmm.
And that is, how do we know we're conscious? If you look up the word conscious or consciousness, synonyms like awareness, synonyms like intelligence
Mm-hmm.
show up. Okay. But when you close down your five physical senses, you can still have an experience. The idea of awareness from the Western medical standpoint tends to be kind of a binary on and off function, right? The
Mm-hmm.
patient, EMT shows up at an accident scene. The person's either conscious and responsive or unconscious, right?
Mm-hmm.
Person is conscious, responsive, aware. This is how we define consciousness in Western medicine. The mechanisms of consciousness tend to be a little more elaborate in their description. Language like consciousness is a compendium of sensory awareness, which produces cortical stimulation and bounces against memory to produce a or render a conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
All right. In English, that might be, you see something, you remember what that something is. You have a file cabinet sitting in the back of your head. That's an apple, that's a tree. And
Mm-hmm.
my response pattern to these things is neutral. I like apples. You might
Mm-hmm.
have a judgment about them. You might like trees. You might not like trees. Think that whatever that is. But that's all a function of consciousness, of the mechanism of consciousness. And we can read what that is through EEG patterns,
Mm-hmm.
through functional MRI. The mystery of the brain and consciousness is still unfolding. We're still
Mm-hmm.
learning a lot
Yeah.
about that. But the idea that consciousness is stimulated by our relationship through sensory input and memory holds, right? My relationship to Maria is developing, right? But I can hear her voice. I can respond to her movements. I can get subtle cues from her. I can learn all sorts of things about her. And after our conversation is over, I'm sure I'll have this wonderful memory of this lovely person that I met and had this conversation with. Next time we see each other, I'll know what to do with that information. Okay. Because I have a
Hmm.
frame of reference now.
Yes.
Consciousness, however, is a mystery. In the East, it is considered more of a fundamental property of reality, a sea in which we swim. In other words, consciousness is not ours personally, it is a global thing, it is a universal thing. It informs the brain rather than the brain rendering it through sensory input. So, this is the great debate
Yeah.
about
Love it.
consciousness in a nutshell. So, what is an out of body experience? If Bob labeled it correctly, that it is an experience one can have beyond the five physical senses. You close your eyes, you put on a pair of headphones, you sleep in a sensory deprivation chamber. The waterbed is buoyant, and you lose your tactile sense. Um, it's heated to outside body temperature, so it feels like you're floating in a cloud. You take these senses
Hmm.
away, can you have an experience?
Hmm.
And the answer is, of course, you can. People who meditate do it all the time, right? They're shutting down their outside input and going within. So we know that an out of body experience may actually be an inner body experience.
Hmm.
You give a cortical stimulation, such as binaural beat frequencies, which have to do with the brainwave consciousness correlates, which Bob called hemisync, right? Because his early findings were that the left and right hemispheres of the brain would sometimes synchronize
Hmm.
as a result of his measuring while playing these frequencies. And it's a bit of an oversimplification, but it gave him a name, a frame of
Hmm.
reference. When you take somebody into the hypnagogic state, which, according to sleep research, and that's a word that comes from sleep research, to depict that null point between N2 and N3 sleep, also known as the hypnagogic slash deep sleep barrier, where we're conscious for a few moments, but very relaxed. And we lose consciousness going through that barrier, that
Hmm.
threshold into deep sleep, where we lose awareness completely. That line is what we were training people to do at the Monroe Institute, to get the body so relaxed, to take away any input except for the hemisync tones and the narration that would guide them through it, which became less and less as time as we went further in the process. People's awareness expands. And that word, expanded awareness, in new age circles sounds all, groovy and psychic and
Yes, it
fluffy and,
does.
woke, to use that language. Just like, I know more than the average bear. That's not exactly what a state of expanded awareness has to be.
Hmm. Hmm.
An expanded state of awareness means that you are no longer relating to your normal
Indeed.
outside influences.
Yes. Yes.
That expanded state of awareness can be an internal one where you are noticing aspects of the self that had previously been hidden to you. Some might call that shadow work,
Hmm.
the current vernacular. It's an inner body experience as
Hmm.
well as an out of body
Yes.
experience. Is that dreaming?
Yeah. I,
It's
I
so
totally
close.
relate because I've done the
Yeah.
trainings. So there's as you were speaking, I was being triggered into those spaces.
Mhm.
And all I can say about the space, it's like my inner reality and whatever outer reality, all of a sudden, that membrane became one.
Yes. And that is a form of integration. that I think Carl Jung would probably applaud,
I
where the
agree.
inner and the outer become something greater, more of a holistic, to use that word, uh, complex. It's
Hmm.
no longer separate. That has value, in my opinion. That is a clear form of consciousness that allows one to run the spectrum between the outer and the inner
Hmm. Yes.
at the same time, like dialing through a radio station until you find what you're looking for, or a
Yes.
radio band until you find what you're looking for. It allows one to be aware of one's transferential responses, to use that psychological term. All right. What's my stuff? What's really happening here? What am I relating to?
Yes.
It allows one the clarity to answer a fundamental question, which is, for me, what am I supposed to do with this information? Because information, as you noted earlier, is
Hmm.
coming to us all the time.
Hmm.
It
Yes.
is defines our relationship to the inner and outer world. It also prompts action. It prompts response. It begs response. You know, anger, all the things we see
Yes.
on
It can
social
hound
media.
you and haunt.
Right. And it stays with you and it actually
Mhm.
defines you. When you get into this hypnagogic state, when you get into these explorations of consciousness anomalies, you can realize that the self is malleable. The highest form of self realization for me is not that I am more than my physical body. I completely understand what that means. It's that the self is malleable,
Mhm.
that I can be molded or I can mold. I can be the palette on which some painter paints, or I can be the painter. The question of sovereignty then comes into play, which is your
Yes.
preference,
Yes.
you know? So that's one of the many benefits of exploring consciousness
Yeah.
in this way, not just to escape or to know that consciousness is a continuum, but also to apply it
Hmm.
to self actualization,
Indeed.
very
Indeed.
much in the Maslow frame.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't want to dominate this
No, I love it.
conversation.
I love
I
it
want to.
because we are, and this is one of pieces of what I endeavor to um evoke with my clients and my students.
Mhm,
All of them have suffered tremendous trauma,
mhm,
tremendous egregious abuses of by humanity.
mhm,
And so we talked a little bit about the negative self-talk that
mhm,
we can not only identify with, but also cling to desperately because that's what we're used to. And so the idea of a human being more than, say, a receiver of information and
mhm,
also being a transmitter, especially if when you're a creative person
mhm,
or you have something really important to share for a lot of people who've been traumatized, that the even idea of sharing, the idea of expressing, the idea of transmitting, sharing your experience is like, oh, that's a no-go zone. There's
mhm.
there's consequences to that.
Sure.
So uh, one of the things that's really important in the process of unwinding and unpacking trauma is really getting to the core of that still sensation within and allowing that sensation to actually grow and
Mhm,
expand beyond the sort of bounds of the trauma self that you're identifying with, if that makes sense.
mhm.
So,
Yes.
yeah, the Monroe Institute, all of those trainings. And now that I know more about your the triad mind, uh, trainings that are available, I think those are critical to really training the mind and receiving training from a place of wholeness. That's what I'm hearing in terms of Monroe's approach and what has been birthed from that foundation that he's laid out, you know.
Well, again, when Bob started this was really about an exploration of the self. He did not want to get into proselytizing a
Mm-hmm.
dogma or a
Mm-hmm.
philosophy. He simply said, I've had these experiences. I know that I am more than my physical body. You too can have these experiences, but I'm not going to tell you what to do with these experiences. That means
Yeah.
heal your trauma,
Yes.
right? You have
Yes.
to include that. So
Yes.
let's talk about how it is that those revelations can be unfolded through
Mm-hmm.
meditation
Mm-hmm.
in the hypnagogic state. Okay, again, we're talking about that null point between wakefulness and sleep. And one of the ways that I help people identify that, because a lot of people are wondering when they first get started with the triad mind, how do I know when I've hit the hypnagogic
Mm-hmm.
threshold?
Yes.
One of the ways you can know that, the first time I got to know that is when I was meditating using binaural beats or hemisync at the time,
Mm-hmm.
and I heard myself snore. And I said, shit,
I hear
she
that
was
all the
right.
time.
She was right. You know, she used to tell me every morning, you snore. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, no, I don't. Prove it. Well, I heard myself. Okay. So, but I was still aware.
Mm-hmm.
What
Yeah.
was I aware of? Right. The hypnagogic state, if you think about the pathology, for lack of a better word, of consciousness between its focus of norm or the locus of control and normal functioning,
Mm-hmm.
how Maria is when she's doing Maria and how Mark is when he's doing Mark. When I go to sleep at night, I might think about what my day was, what I'd like for my day to be tomorrow, the things I have to do, things that I enjoyed, things that I didn't enjoy, whatever it is that one thinks about. It's very linear, right? One thought can lead to the next thought, can lead to the next thought, and there's a connective tissue, so to
Mm-hmm.
speak.
Yes.
Well, as you're relaxing more and more, your body's falling asleep, your brainwave activity is slowing down into a more of a theta delta region
Mm-hmm.
with a low amplitude alpha. All right. So you're still cognizant, you're still functioning.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, that linear thought goes a little askew. All of a sudden, I might have an image of a cat. The cat had nothing to do with what I was thinking of. Or I might see a tree or some other what is referred to as hypnagogic vignette, something
Mm.
that emerges. All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And if I stay aware, I can ride that wave and allow those images to flow. It's more of a yin state of receptivity
Yes.
rather than a yang state of focused attention, right? But I'm still there. I'm still present. I haven't fallen asleep and I'm not dreaming. And I know that I'm not dreaming because I have not passed that threshold into deep sleep, only to reemerge in REM sleep, where dreams are
Mm-hmm.
actualized.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, what is that hypnagogic experience? Subconscious content begins to emerge, and it's symbolic and it's representational.
Mm-hmm.
It may not seem to be connected linearly, but if I sit and examine it long enough, I start to see the connective tissue, what Jung called synchronicity, meaningful coincidences,
Love
these
it.
things that arise, right?
Love it.
That state of consciousness can be invaluable on two levels with doing trauma work. One, you're kind of dissociated from the experience.
Mm-hmm.
You're not re-experiencing it on a conscious level through some form of psychotherapy where, okay, let's talk about your relationship to your dad or whatever the trauma was ad nauseum.
Mm-hmm.
Now It's like confronting it in a dream state, but it's not a nightmare. It's symbolic in imagery and it
Hmm.
bubbles up.
Yes.
And if you're in the hands of a skilled therapist who understands that, they can then say, okay, let's go and revisit that. Let's
Yes.
participate in that mystical experience, which then somehow synthesizes or integrates it. It's a strange thing. I don't
Oh,
know how
it,
it
it's
works.
it's wonderful. It's wonderful. And I'm going to share this. The therapy work that I did in the 80s when I was in my 20s
Mm-hmm.
was with a Jungian analyst
Mm-hmm.
who knew about Bob Monroe's work.
Uh-huh.
And so the way she really mentored me was not just through the dream world, but through the archetypes. And
Yes.
so those images that you're talking about, I can still see them vividly.
Right.
And the just the representational work that I did through the journaling of
Mm-hmm.
recording those images was, I mean, it was powerful work.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember at first the resistance of going, ah, this is just new age bullshit. I just
Right. Right.
not, and I hated the whole idea of it. But then the way she utilized the archetypes was very delicious because,
Mm-hmm.
I'm an artist, so I would sketch and do watercolors in the dream journal things. And
Mm-hmm.
that was so helpful because it helped distill all that rich and very thematic in many, many ways, and to be able to translate it from my recall onto a piece of paper
Mm-hmm.
and onto a journal was like, holy moly.
So
Yeah.
I have some questions around that, being
Yes.
that you've had the experience and you're willing to share. Those archetypes, did you ever fully understand them?
Not really.
Right?
Not really.
What's
They
that?
were
How
I
can
felt like
that
a
be so
mermaid.
potent?
I
Right?
felt like a mermaid. And so I have an affinity to mermaids and fairies. So uh depending on, and they were colors. So I attributed certain colors to the mermaid experience and other colors to the fairy experience.
Oh.
And then I had experiences with the demons. Okay, because there was
Mm-hmm.
a lot of that.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a whole other kind of contextual just uh, awfulness, but the curiosity was there to face
Mm-hmm.
it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a rich experience. But as far as the archetypes, like there was never anything definitive. Like they were changeable,
Mm-hmm.
interchangeable.
It's an amazing process, isn't it?
Mhm.
And it's healing. And I
Yes.
don't know why. I don't think many Jungians know why either,
I don't
or
think so
depth
either.
psychologists.
Yeah, yeah.
All they know is that it's happening.
Hmm.
It's not a behavioral modification, right? It's not
No,
cognitive behavioral
no,
therapy where you face something
no,
about yourself and
no
make
CBD
it
there.
conscious. It
CBT.
just poof, right?
Yeah,
It
yeah.
just poofs, disappears, somehow gets integrated. And the fact that it emerges rather than is invoked is a
Yes, that's
phenomenon.
important.
Yeah,
Like,
where
where did
does
that
that
come
come
from?
from? Exactly.
Hmm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And now we get into the mystery of information and where it comes from, right? Some of us can say, well, information comes as a result of an external factor, which is using some vibrational, and I'll explain what I mean by that, means of transmission. We think we see things, right? We think we hear things. We think we feel things, touch things, right? Taste things.
Hmm.
All of this, ladies and gentlemen, is vibrational.
Mm-hmm.
And that sounds groovy and new agey and crystal loving and, blah, 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 blah. No, we're talking physics. Okay. And I'm not even going to get into the weird realm of quantum physics, simple physics. That image that you're looking at right now is there. I'm quite real. You're obviously quite real. But we all know that at an atomic level, that's not quite entirely true.
Mm-hmm.
Bodies that we're looking at are a process of atoms with actually vibrating and moving at very high rates, reflecting light, which
Mm-hmm.
too is an atomic enigma. It's both particle and wave.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
All of this goes through your eyes. We take it for granted. I'm looking at Maria. I'm hearing Maria's voice. No, not really. I'm hearing the vibrational patterns of Maria's voice, which can be analyzed and looked at.
Mm-hmm.
I am seeing a visual representation of Maria's physical form reflected by light, taken in through my eyes,
Mm-hmm.
through my ears, which vibrates the tympanic nerve, right?
Yes.
And then becomes electrical signals. That is my experience of you.
Yes.
All the information that I'm taking in is vibrational. So we're way outside of the realm of very, very new age stuff here,
Yes.
right? This
Yeah.
is hardcore science and physical reality.
Yeah.
My interpretation of those things is purely subjective.
Mm-hmm.
If my wife were sitting here listening to this conversation, she might have a very different experience of our conversation
Mm-hmm.
and the people involved, right? It's all her personal experience. But here we are in subjective reality, taking in information in the best way that we know how and rendering conclusions based on our memories.
Mm-hmm.
Even though you and I are having a fresh, new, alive experience of meeting each other for the very first time, we had a short conversation before you hit the record button, and we found all the places where we resonate.
Yes.
All of that is being brought into this conversation.
Yes.
The sound of my voice, the sound of your voice, our love of music, our love of exploring consciousness, all of these things help us to bond.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Our stepkids at
Exactly.
such a young age.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, the audience wouldn't know about that conversation, but we both had stepkids at a
Yes.
very young age,
Mm-hmm.
and they were our kids, our children, and they were part of our growth pattern.
Mm-hmm.
Just to fill in the blank to the people who
Yes.
have no idea what that frame of reference was. That experience of consciousness is partially information that we're taking in and information that we are rendering based on memory.
Mm-hmm.
There's also information that's coming through that's not necessarily physical or hearing
Mm-hmm.
or visual. There's a kinesthetic sensation that I'm sure you're privy to. You feel it? I
Indeed.
do. I
Yes.
do. Right.
Yes.
What's that about?
Yeah.
Where's that come from?
It's not new age BS.
Or we're making shit up in order to try to solve a problem that is unsolvable, right?
Yes.
I don't really know the answer. And I'm not sure I want to know the answer
Yeah.
because inquiry allows me to keep exploring. It
Yes.
keeps me curious.
Yeah.
I want to know what I'm supposed to do with this information. And if I sit with it and scan that radio band that of consciousness, I know where does that come from?
Mm-hmm.
That knowingness.
Yes.
Some people refer to it as clairgnosis, as if it's some, I don't know, exotic form of consciousness that only psychics can have. I say no.
Yeah.
I
I say
say
no. I say we all have it.
we do. We do. And the way we get there is through exploring it.
Mm-hmm.
That means you have to break it down a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
What am I exploring? So in the triad mind, Bob Monroe's system was to keep on going further and further in consciousness. He laid out a map of different stratum of consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
which I think are a little too rigid and imply have direct implications. He called focus 10 the state of mind awake, body asleep, the hypnagogic state, right?
Mm-hmm.
Focus 12 was a state of expanded awareness. What are we exactly talking about there when we're
Yeah.
talking about expanding awareness? Focus 15, a state of no time. Well, if you have no time and you bring awareness into a state where time does not exist, how can you have any
Yeah.
experience?
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. And that's time itself.
Right. And the one who brought these things to my attention was Edgar Mitchell, who founded the Institute of Noetic Sciences, was also an
Mm-hmm.
Apollo astronaut. He said to me one day, you got to be careful not to confuse the map with the territory. And that stuck with me like I mean, it was like a boulder being dropped in
Yeah.
my foundation of asking myself these questions. What is consciousness and why is it beneficial to explore it? The territories that we're actually exploring, I've broken down, are threefold as a threefold model of consciousness: conscious mind, subconscious mind, superconscious.
Mm-hmm.
That is influenced, of course, by Carl Jung's thinking when he talked about the collective unconscious,
Unconscious.
which is where a lot of that information, that kinesthetic or direct knowing, comes from.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really a psychic sense, it's the one's ability to be able to discern an E note from an F sharp,
Mm-hmm.
right? With your training, with my training, that kind of discerning happens when I get
Mm-hmm.
that vibratory information, right?
Mm-hmm.
We know what key we're in. If I'm going to harmonize with you, I listen to the melody you're singing
Mm-hmm.
and I sing the third or the fifth, right? Above, below, my choice within the limitation of my range. But that exploration of that threefold model allows the territories to be vast,
Mm-hmm.
connected, overlapping without getting rigid or to sharply define what the experience
Yeah.
should be. You may have an experience of timelessness,
Mm-hmm.
but that doesn't mean you're in a place where there is no time. You may have a transcendent experience, but that doesn't mean it's an out of body experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's going to have whatever meaning it has for you. Synchronicity is about meaningful coincidences. The coincidence being the meeting of one consciousness blending with another, an
Mm-hmm.
angle of incidence,
Yes.
or something that emerges without any rationale,
I
like
love it. I love it
archetypes.
so I love it so much. And I always say I lead a very, I call it synchronicious life.
Mm. Cheers. Cheers for noticing.
Yes, yes. And I think a lot of that is I do it on purpose.
Mhm.
I have the intention of enjoying the moment.
Mhm.
Even if it's a shit moment, I'm really going to get into the shit of it
Mhm.
and really immerse myself in the contrasting of it, of
Mhm.
that experience without identifying with it. And that is, I believe that is the core of moving beyond your traumas, is to disidentify with whatever shit experience you've had. Also disidentifying with any blissful experience, because I know you can get caught up in that as well. And
Yes.
and if you don't have your way, the day is just, it's completely wiped out.
And time is the only commodity you'll never be able to get back. So use it
Yes.
wisely, right?
Yes.
That process is, well, I think there's a lot of wisdom in that neutrality, but I'm biased because I too try to approach
Yeah.
things with a
Yeah.
neutral
It's a
mindset.
practice. It's not a one-off. I have great days. I can go for long stretches of time and be in that zone, and then
Hmm.
something will come out of nowhere where I'm just next 48 hours, forget about it.
Yeah, I understand. You
It
did a
happens.
lovely, I think, a two-part series on expansion and contraction and
Mhm.
how they
Yes.
tend to be mm, equated to one another in
Yes.
terms of the
Yes.
volume,
Yes.
the potency. The
Yeah.
greater the expansion, the more tight
Yes.
the
And
contraction in the
they
aftermath.
follow one another
They do.
because it's a natural rhythm
Hmm. Where does that come from?
from the Hermetica, from the
No, I mean the rhythm.
oh,
I
yes.
understand the hermetic constructs.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know, but I know that in my own life, every expansion in my life
Hmm.
has always been followed by an equal and opposite contraction. And it used to mess with me so much, but it happened enough times, and I was able to like just sit with the
Hmm.
experience and go, and realize, oh, and then chronic
Hmm.
doing that. So I'm very scholarly in my experiences. I'll write it down and I'll really kind of dissect it and really tune in to
Right.
thoughts, physical sensation, knee-jerk reactions, and then follow up on its integration or its dissipation,
Hmm.
whatever the case may be. Because it isn't always one way or another. That's part of the delight of it, I think.
And there's wisdom. Where does that come from? Experience, um, a willingness to come to acceptance with the ebb and
Mm.
flow.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a yin type of mindset? I mean, I think women are far more attuned to the natural flow and rhythms of life than men are.
Mm-hmm.
Most men who tend to have those feelings of contraction try to fight them off rather than
Mm-hmm.
accept them for what they are. It reflects the image that they've been projected, or that's been projected onto them as to, what you do when confronted with the
Mm-hmm.
enemy. You either fight it or, you know, pick it up and pick yourself up by the bootstraps and get over it, buttercup,
Mm-hmm.
because life ain't easy, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But being with that contraction is a form of neutrality that transcends the polar opposites, in my opinion,
Mm-hmm.
where you can actually say, it is this and it is that, and I am neither.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
that is a hermeticum
Yes.
mindset.
Yes. Yeah.
So well done on that. How long have you been studying the hermetic writings and hermetic
Well,
teachings?
so I was the Kabbalion, the book, was
Mm-hmm.
actually in that pile of books, in that
Mm-hmm.
box
Right.
that the cat peed on when I
Mm-hmm.
and that I received when I was 12.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I was just fascinated by it. It was like, huh. So it was a simultaneous reading of the Kabbalion, of Journeys Out of the Body,
Mm-hmm.
and picking up Neville Goddard. It was a whole series of his books, and I just I was like this sponge absorbing it at 12, because I was really making the plotting my way out of this war zone, like consciously doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have enough. I hit a wall where this is it. I and it's sink or swim. I have to figure out how reality works. And in that time, 18 months to 2 years time, I learned somehow, some way, through experience, through practicing, through reading, through just my own awareness and pushing that envelope and the
Mm,
contrasting of what was reality and what it was that I wanted, how to mold my experience.
hmm.
And it worked. It was quite astonishing. It worked.
Yes, I understand you completely. We can go down that rabbit hole if you want
Okay,
to.
let's go.
Well, before we do, I want to say with you have this wonderful balance, wonderful sense of balance that I detect, where you can be in the shit soup, but not be the shit soup.
Mhm.
Is that an assumption, or did I hear you
That's
correctly?
perfect. That is perfect. That's perfect.
How is it that you are able to achieve that balance without dissociating from it, which I see a lot of people doing with that mindset presented in Kabbalion
Yes.
and the revelation?
So to answer that, I will go back to a very poignant experience when I was very young.
Mm,
Um, my mother was very psychotic, but she was
mm,
highly functional. She
mhm,
was the head of the department. She was very accomplished, a PhD,
mhm,
very, very accomplished, but very disturbed. And she had been um, during World War II. She's Filipina, half
mhm.
Spanish. During World War II, her family went underground. They were on the hit list for
Oh,
the
boy.
Japanese during the
Right.
occupation. So she had a lot of stuff going on. I did not know this at the time,
Sure.
but I knew enough as a child to know there's something off going on here. I don't know what it is, but the way she would just be so violent, and it was directed at me. And I was fortunate to have a nanny who was conscious about what was going on
Mhm,
and encouraged me to never forget who I am and what I am. And she would always say things like, for lack of a better way to explain it, call me divine in the flesh. Okay. And so that kind of languaging and the kind of, I aligned with being a fairy that I could
mhm.
just fly off and while my mom was having a fit, I could fly off and I can still be in the same room with her, but I could just soar all over my own little universe.
Uh-huh.
And I remember those moments where I was like, okay. I knew that I was going to be okay as long as I could tune her out and do my own thing. And it became a regular practice for me. I call it waltzing in and out of the matrix, where what is waltzing in and out of the matrix? Is it my body? No, it's my consciousness, my awareness,
Mhm,
my focus in reality, to focus on what I wanted to be experiencing, even though maybe she was beating the shit out of me,
mm.
maybe, or yelling at me, or whatever. And I utilized that. As weird as that sounds, and I was taken to a lot of that psychiatric stuff. I was given Ritalin, I was given all kinds of stuff, and I remember taking that drug. I remember the first time I took it, I think I was like 6,
Mm,
and feeling my awareness, my consciousness receding out. Like I felt this, I was falling back, and I'm going,
mhm.
oh, we're not doing this. So I would take the pill and stick it in the philodendron. And that plant went insane. It was all over the house. It had just completely taken over the walls of the house. So I had strategies to get beyond the confines of this war zone that was my mother's reality.
You also had a mentor and somebody to pay attention
Yes, yes.
to what was going on and help
Yeah,
guide you through
yeah.
that. What a miracle, huh?
Indeed. And so I've always had helpers along the way, not for
Yes.
very long, because eventually she got fired. So,
Hmm.
and then, but I've had little sparks of light and delight that managed to like give me some support. And being a also a musician, so I used to go play the piano. I had my first recital when I was 4.
Wow.
And so going to the piano was a way for me to like really offload a lot of frustration, a lot of sadness, a lot
Hmm.
of a lot of it was very wistful. Um, I was given those opportunities, and to my mother's credit, because she didn't want to deal with me, she sent me off to dance school, martial arts, gymnastics, piano, violin, guitar, all the stuff, which I just took to because it was like, okay, cool, we'll do that. And I spent a lot of time outside with nature. So um, I know I'm kind of meandering around,
No, I'm following you
but
very,
this
very
was
well.
the sort of expansion, if you will, I think,
Uh-huh.
of a toolkit that just kind of naturally evolved through her not wanting to deal with me, her avoidance of me, and
Hmm.
also me taking to it because I wanted to avoid her, because
Right,
interaction together was very volatile.
right.
Whenever we were together, that volatility, because I was the object of her disdain, her whatever, allowed me to hone in those skills of being able to like take flight, as it were, and waltz in and out of the matrix.
But it wasn't a mental strategy that you
No,
constructed. It
no,
was very much a vibrational one,
indeed,
wasn't it?
indeed. It's like,
One that was
okay,
informed
yeah,
rather,
yeah.
yeah.
And there was a certain way, and I've shared this before, where I could smell when she was going to go when she was going to explode. There was a
Really?
metallic smell and a taste in the air that I was aware of, where it's
Uh-huh.
like, uh-oh. And that was
Uh-huh.
like a signal for me to prepare for flight.
That's an
But I don't
astounding,
remember thinking prepare for flight. It was just,
right.
yeah.
That was your response. That's an astounding use of those senses. It's like a form of synesthesia that allows a psychic awareness that
Hmm.
might be brought on by some form of hypervigilance, but
Yes.
that is truly an expanded state of awareness.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people wouldn't be aware of that taste in their mouth, or
Yeah.
and then be able to make the association with it, and
Hmm.
then the connection
Hmm.
between an actual experience that
Yeah.
happens in
Yeah.
real time.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. So you developed a psychic sense, for lack of a better word, a lot of them,
Indeed,
actually,
indeed, indeed.
all
And
of
I
which are
really
vibration.
believe that the smell and the taste in the air, I really do believe it was because her chemistry was changing. She
Yeah,
was transforming. And I'm sure it was based on her own trauma and whatever was happening in that moment, but just
right.
changing her biochemistry.
And you were connected to that awareness. That's
Hmm.
amazing.
Yeah.
So, but it wasn't mental, and it
No,
wasn't a construct. It was like,
no.
okay, mom's going to do this strange thing, and this is my strategic
Yeah.
reaction to it.
Yeah.
It just sort of happened. And it's so interesting to me that it was vibrational in nature that allows you to offload the
Hmm.
feelings that you were having, and the vibration of the music and the nature
Hmm.
surroundings, whatever dance, all of
Hmm.
which is, again, vibrational.
Yeah. Yeah.
speaks to one's ability to sit in the soup, not be in the soup, and actually create, I don't know, a bouillabaisse out of what would ordinarily be a shit soup.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
something that artistic. That's fantastic. What a lovely early experience to make you who you are today as a teacher. So, in your teaching, how do you help people become aware of the potentials of using? I'm sorry, I'm
Yeah.
interviewing
No,
you now. Is that okay?
no.
I don't know if I'm just curious by,
Well,
about you, your
well, a
experiences.
lot of it, I utilize a lot of dream work and journaling.
Right.
So, because a lot of it for my clients are they're so stuck in this sort of concretized mindset.
Hmm.
And however, the concretized mindset is the polarity of opposites.
Hmm.
You know, the desire to be loved and the fear of being loved and all the
Hmm.
consequences.
Hmm.
So I would utilize these journaling and very, very simple because what you're doing is you're actually excavating all that concretized mindset in these polarity of opposites. So the desire to be loved, the fear of being loved, the desire to not be loved, and the fear of not being loved. So
Hmm.
those four squares, four
Right.
sheets of paper, and you just sit there and you just offload it. And it works for me. This was something that Pearl, my analyst, would have me do. And I didn't want to do it. And then when I
Hmm.
finally hit a wall where my resistance was like, okay, you just effing do it, just do it. So I remember doing it. And I remember I could hear the step kids in the background screaming and acting out because they would act out when I wasn't quite right. And I remember just offloading that and thinking, oh, I need to share this because as I did it and when I completed it, the kids were great.
Right.
There was an immediate visceral change in the vibe of the house
Hmm.
because of what I had undertaken, what I had the audacity to do and face. And
Right.
then, shortly thereafter, like within 5 years, 3 years, 3 to 4 years, 5 years, I had clients and I didn't even hang up a sign. I didn't have a
Right.
business card for the first like 8 years of my
Uh-huh.
practice because I didn't know what I was doing. I was
Uh-huh.
just one foot in front of the other, endeavoring to replicate the tools, the techniques that I learned that were very, very successful and was able to do that. And
Which ended up being a whole lot more than what they call coping mechanisms, right?
yes,
You
yes,
literally shifted the
yeah,
vibration and the reality of the container that
yes,
was your home
yes, yes, yeah,
through doing your own inner work.
yeah. And
Now, what
Monroe's
does that
work
tell us?
was very key to that because
Mm.
of the dreaming process.
Right,
Because,
right.
and between the out of body experiences and all of that, because I think by that time, 87, that he'd come out with two books,
Yes,
more journeys. Okay, so there
right.
was
Far
that.
journeys, right?
And then my work with Pearl, the Jungian analyst, oh, it was
Hmm.
rich. It was
Hmm.
totally rich. And those dreams, I had a set of dreams for 9 months, 10 months, perhaps,
Hmm.
outlining a blow by blow, step by step by step of this trauma deactivation. That's what I call it,
Hmm.
trauma
Yeah.
deactivation.
Uh-huh.
And it facilitates in my just in my universe heart mind body soul spirit coordination
Hmm.
where all those parts are it synchroniciously speaking to one another in the same language utilizing the same alphabet practically. um
Yes.
yeah Yeah.
And it's not a mental construct.
Mm-mm.
It's not a function of imagination.
Mm-mm.
It's not a function of fantasy. You're literally working with the harmonics of yourself as it propagates out into what Bob called the field
Mm-hmm.
and
There we
changing the
go. Yeah.
nature of reality.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds really new agey law of attraction stuff,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, it does. And I hate that shit.
And yet, that's not what's really occurring.
Yeah.
What's occurring is you change the vibrational nature of your relationship to the aspects of self which had you propagating your vibration into the field in a new way,
Mm-hmm.
having you relate to everything in your world, your personal
Yes.
world, in your home
Yes.
in a new way.
Yes.
That is the magic of sympathetic resonance
Mm-hmm.
spoken about in Kabbalion.
Yes.
That is the
Yeah.
quintessence of what's going on. It's
Indeed.
very much like harmonizing with somebody who's singing a note.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You sing a G note and I sing a C note, we've got a harmony going,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
If you modulate in the key of G and I modulate with you,
Mm-hmm.
maintaining that
Yeah.
fifth or fourth,
Yeah.
I'm working with you.
Yeah.
We're singing in harmony. It's
It's
the
it's
ability to bring
amazing.
balance into a situation which was prior to discordant,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
out of phase with one another.
Yes. And that period of my life, I used to sell insurance. Can you imagine? It's like, whoa. And and then hit all my music gigs and take care of kids and do
Uh,
all this.
right.
When those dreams and Pearl helped me decipher all of the downloads, quote unquote. I didn't want to go there. It's like, and she says, we need to pay attention. You're being instructed. So she was the one that said that. And I was like, I don't know about that. But what you're talking about, the sort of harmonious and the disharmony, all the things in my life that were out of alignment, that were discordant, that were, just soul sucking
Mm-hmm.
in my face completely. Like I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't do the insurance anymore. I couldn't be in my marriage anymore. It
Mm-hmm.
took another like 7, 8 years, but it was like, oh, okay.
Took a
Uh,
lot of courage,
there was
right?
just a lot of things going on in my life, all these relationships, these really out of alignment, just not synchronicious things that I had just been putting up with, for lack of a better way to put it, in my efforts to see the best in humans,
Mm-hmm.
which has been I mean, it has been one of my it's an Achilles heel of mine, because what it does, it put me into this naivete. And
Mm-hmm.
now I'm not so naive. It's like, you show me who you are, I'm gonna
Right.
believe you.
Yeah.
And that takes a while to figure out.
Does
Yeah,
because we want to trust, we
indeed.
want to
Yeah.
believe. And I think humans are inherently good.
Hmm.
I think we're also inherently a mixed bag of
Yes.
good and whatever.
Yeah.
And the more we do this type of work to realize that
Yeah.
the things that lead us astray from our core essential self, which I'll
Hmm.
call goodness,
Hmm.
right? Light,
Yeah.
love, etc., they create a shadow
Yeah.
upon that
Yeah.
light, even
Yeah.
if it's just a shade, and that's brought on by trauma and understanding. The word compassion
Hmm.
comes from the word compati in Latin, means to suffer with,
Yes.
not like your suffering is my suffering
Yeah.
necessarily, but the notion that, oh, yeah, I hear you're suffering. I
Mhm.
understand you're suffering because I too have suffered. And
Mhm.
I'm willing to sit in the shit soup with you
Yeah,
without becoming your shit soup
it did.
or actually trying to get you to reform the shit soup into a bouillabaisse,
Yeah.
right? My job is just to be with you in that
Yes.
process
Yes.
and to say, I hear you. I'm with you.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
understand that.
That is so important.
Oh my God, yeah.
Um, yeah. Important in trauma work
Oh
to
my God,
uh,
yeah.
to not identify and to also not cater to it too. Because I know I one of the things I've experienced, especially in a lot of new agey circles, is the victim that the narciss victims become these immense pain in the ass narcissists where it just is like nonstop this just gimme, gimme, gimme. And I just don't do that. I don't do that.
I understand.
Yeah, yeah.
They don't know how to source themselves.
Hmm.
It's really that simple.
Yeah,
But you
yeah.
can show them how to do that.
Yes. Yeah.
And when you do that, you are showing them something about themselves that is what we both understand as the great work. That that information of who you truly are
Hmm.
can begin to emerge in
Hmm.
a way that is creative
Yes.
and responsive to whatever information is coming to you
Yeah.
that is helping you to move on the path you need to be on.
Hmm.
I don't know who directs that path,
Yeah.
but I suspect that it's an aspect of the self that or soul or psyche that understands the greater truth and wisdom
Hmm.
of our interconnectedness to all things, another aspect of synchronicity.
Hmm. Hmm.
So while synchronicity can be synchronicious, it can also be intentionally discordant so that we get to understand something.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you have to have the eyes and ears to understand that
Indeed.
something's going on here.
Yeah. I'm curious, what has been your greatest challenge with the great work?
Greatest, as if I've actually made a list. Doubt comes to mind.
Hmm.
I am a skeptic by nature.
Hmm.
So I will see some kind of miracle unfold that is undeniable. And a part of me will go, that can't be freaking true. That can't be true. I need to understand how that unfolded rationally so that I can
Hmm.
break down. I get all mail. So I can break down the mechanism of it and not only understand it for myself, but apply it in my work.
Hmm.
And then I say, a part of me goes, hey, you can doubt your own senses if you like, right? But it is what it is. You saw it, you witnessed it. It was even witnessed by others. Okay, so let's put that doubt aside for a minute and
Hmm.
just chill out with that for a minute. Let's put the need for a mechanism or understanding aside for a minute and just be with the miracle that unfolded in whatever, because miracles have degrees, right? But
Yes.
I knew it was important. What does that feel like? What does it feel like to be in the presence of that which unfolded for me to learn something?
Hmm.
I'm mystified. I'm blown away. I am humbled. I'm reverent. I am taking it in. I become more of a receptive type of consciousness,
Hmm.
more yin to use that language,
Hmm.
right? Because consciousness is both yin and yang. You direct things, you receive things, you
Hmm.
propagate, you take in. when I balance that state, my questions go away. It's like when I go to the temple of the divine, and I'm not going to define God for anybody. So, whatever that is for you, knock on the door and it opens itself. I, all of the questions that I came with, in my baggage of suitcases of questions about the mysteries of all this unfolding, they just disappear.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what to ask. All I know how to do is be present with something that is so far beyond my understanding, that is the presence of wisdom, that
Mm-hmm.
is that collapse of subject and object, the polar tensions of opposites, and create a unity or a
Mm-hmm.
trinity, like a Celtic knot,
Yes.
which is why I use the triquetra as my logo in the Triad mind. I don't know if that is a gift bestowed upon me or how can I even say this? Or a part of me yet left undiscovered that wants to still secretly try to understand. Did that make sense to you?
Yes.
Like
Yes.
a little shadow aspect that I haven't quite uncovered yet. So when you ask that question, what is my greatest challenge? That was one of them that comes up. Doubt.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think a little self-doubt and skepticism is always called for, at least in my world.
Yeah.
And yet there are times where I just have to drop it, right? I just have to, because it's like a choiceless choice. I have no choice but to drop
Mm-hmm.
it. I
Yeah.
am in the presence of something I don't understand. That could be an aspect of self. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know yet.
Yeah. And that creates the opening to receive.
Yes. Doubt creates resistance, which would have been second on my list, right? But if I let go of the doubt and just be in the presence of whatever that is that's unfolding in the moment, I'm doing it right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm not at the, I'm not at the doorways to heaven right now. And I am. I'm sitting with Maria, exploring the mysteries of consciousness. I'm humbled, right? Because I don't have the answers.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have the doubt. I don't have the resistance. In this moment, I'm just letting it flow.
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea where this will lead.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't even need to know.
Me neither.
It's right. That took patience. So if I was going to put a second on that list that you asked me in terms of um, challenges,
Mm-hmm.
patience would
Mm-hmm.
be second. Being patient takes time.
Yes.
One of my biggest pet peeves in life has been wasting time,
Mm-hmm.
which is a value judgment, right? Once I realized that was simply predicated on a value judgment, I learned how to use and be in time in a different way.
Ah.
My relationship to patience, which is a threshold level. Yeah. I have patience with somebody's bullshit up to that point, and then it pushes and it pushes, and it's like, okay, we're done, and
Yep.
boom,
We're done.
they're off. Right. I can't say my patience is infinite, but I've become more tolerant.
Mhm.
And it's part of the
Yeah.
triad mind work. I
Yeah.
speak of all of these territories of consciousness as having a barrier of a threshold
Yes.
rather than, an absolute map of the territory.
Mm-hmm.
You reach a certain threshold when it's going to come to the hypnagogic state where you go past it. A threshold is defined in two ways that I like to use it. One is a portal or passageway from one space into another, like
Mm-hmm.
a open doorway from your living room to your dining room.
Yes.
Two different environments, and there's a line of demarcation.
Mm-hmm.
That's your threshold, right?
Yes.
Another has to do with tolerance thresholds, which is kind of like a fuse or a circuit breaker, an electrical circuit.
Ah.
Too much energy going through that circuit trips the threshold, the
Mm-hmm.
tolerance threshold of the circuit breaker. It
Okay.
shuts it down. Same thing works in the psyche. Too much experience
Mm-hmm.
in what Jung called the mystical participation. Like you go to a workshop and you get overwhelmed with the sensation of being with like-minded people involved in
Mm-hmm.
some ritual of learning, and you expand and you expand and you expand, and all of a sudden, too much, too
Yeah.
much for the psyche. It
Yeah.
burns you out. That can be applied to so many things in life.
Mm-hmm.
Cognitive dissonance, the ability to deal with another person's opinions or
Mm-hmm.
that are opposed to your own,
Yes.
the lack of compassion that we see
Mhm.
in societal structures. It's all a flow of energy. Again, sounds really new agey, right? It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
dude, can't we just vibe together? Can't you just adopt my belief systems? Or why are you
No.
discounting my reality?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like, because your reality doesn't match my reality is the
Yes.
first thing.
Yeah.
And maybe that tension of opposites, rather than tripping the circuit, can actually be nullified to at least a degree
Mm-hmm.
where a third thing can emerge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You mentioned the Kabbalion as one of your early influences.
Mm-hmm.
I am a student of all three schools of Kabbalah,
Mm.
which
Okay.
is not the Kabbalion.
No. No.
The,
Completely
the
different.
Kabbalion is like
It's
a
its own thing.
synthesis, right?
Okay.
And each one of those schools is its own thing, but they have unified principles of the pillars of the tree of life, which are
Mm-hmm.
masculine, feminine, and the center pillar being consciousness or
Mm-hmm.
neutral. So it's
Mm-hmm.
positive, negative, neutral,
Sure.
force, form, balance.
Mm-hmm.
Those principles live within us and live
Mm-hmm.
outside of us.
Yes.
And if you can follow the flow of the circuitry, you can actually shift the vibration of things in such a way that the shit soup now becomes a bouillabaisse. That instead of being painted as somebody else's creative mindset and the information they're throwing at you to create you, you are now the artist creating
Mm.
your own palette.
So cool.
It's a very deep understanding of the flow of life and
Mm-hmm.
all of its phases and cyclical nature. And it does include expansion and contraction and positive,
Mm-hmm.
negative, yin, yang, etc.
Mm-hmm.
All of which, in my opinion, are functions of this thing we call consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Bob knew this, but he wasn't raised with any religious background.
Mm-hmm.
His father was a professor of Romance languages, and his mother was actually a medical doctor. So you're talking about very progressive and learned people in
Mm-hmm.
the 1920s, very early on. Women, I
Mm-hmm.
don't imagine there were a lot of female doctors at the time.
Yeah.
Bob didn't have any understanding of any of this stuff. When he had his out of body experiences, so he had no real frame of reference, right? But his experiences in consciousness prompted him to not only develop the gateway experience, which is well known, but attracted the attention of the CIA and the federal government or the US government with regards to Stargate and the remote viewing program,
Mhm. But of
because
course.
I'm sorry,
But of course.
oui, certainement.
Yes.
uh,
They know a good thing.
Yeah, because there's something to it.
Yes.
It sounds mystical. It sounds weird. It sounds new agey, and yet there's something to it. I want to know what that something is. I
Mm-hmm.
have to be patient. in order to
Yeah.
find that
Yeah.
out. And
Yeah.
I'm not always going to understand the mechanisms
Yeah.
because, I get to understand what I get to understand. That's it.
Yeah.
So that's a long story to answer a very simple question. What's on my top two or the top portions of my list of things that, make it
Wow.
difficult for me to move
Hmm.
through. But that is the essence.
That's so
Patience
cool.
being
And I can relate. I can relate. I've patience for me is the development of grace. It
yes.
it's that and grace is, it's patience and acceptance
Hmm.
all rolled into one,
Hmm.
letting go,
Hmm. And
letting
where does
I
that come from?
it, well, I know for me, I went through a period where I was, noticing how I could mold reality. I I went through this very, very painful period of erroneously believing that I could control reality.
Mm,
Yeah. Yeah, that was a
yeah.
shit show because uh, I not only
Excuse me.
created trouble for myself and drama,
Mm,
but actually the best part of it is I got my butt kicked and I was
hmm.
humbled.
Hmm.
And I needed to be humbled
Hmm.
in order to be able to develop that grace. Because when you work with people who have incredible trauma, you can't beat them over with a stick. It
No,
is
that
not
could
your
re-traumatize
time.
them, right?
Indeed, it's not your
Yeah.
it's not your place to push them. It is
Hmm.
also not your place to deny their experience or to dismiss it.
Hmm.
However, one of the things that I did develop was to be able to create a boundary around it, to create a parameter
Hmm.
that, if there's one thing that I have learned, is the way you talk, and that includes repeating a story, a shit story, over and over and over and over again,
Hmm.
is another way of promoting that victim narcissism, and
Hmm.
also a way to keep you in the shit soup, to
Hmm.
re-traumatize you over and over and over again. And a lot of people get off on their story. And that was a real interesting process for me because I I enjoy storytelling.
Hmm.
I think stories are very important, but the what's even more important is to be able to tell your story and disidentifying yourself from that story. And that's tricky.
Hmm.
It is tricky, 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 tricky. And a lot of people have not mastered that switch. Or it's not a switch, it's actually an evolution. It's a quantum leap of kind of reality jumping. I can't remember what they called that, but transcending really, and going from one level of experience to a higher level of it, for lack of a better way to describe it. And I don't even like that hierarchy. It's just a different way. It's a different perspective. It's a higher perspective when we're, going up in terms of the evolution staircase, and we're at a higher vantage point and looking at that experience or looking at that trauma. Um, so, which brings me to the question about what inspired you to create the triad mind. I mean, it's amazing. I could be on that site like all day long and just
So you're asking about the website, or you're asking about the program that I teach?
the program, and we'll go to the website too, because that's amazing.
Thank you for the kind words. I think the word boundary applies.
Mhm.
You said boundaries. And when people think about boundaries, they tend to think about rigid lines of demarcation to protect their psyche, right?
Yes.
Don't cross this boundary. It's a boundary for me. If you do, it's a deal breaker.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think that's a good use of boundaries because especially when you come to an understanding that there's some part of you that no longer is willing to accept any form of abuse patterns to repeat a cycle, right? That
Mm-hmm.
makes sense.
Yes.
But a boundary is also a threshold, it's a definition of self. You could not have an experience of lovemaking, for instance, without touch, right? And
Mm-hmm.
what's boundary if not, you know, where I begin, you end, or
Mm-hmm.
or begin, right?
Yeah.
And that is a blending. So pursuant to that thinking, one of the things that I noticed about the Monroe work was that there was a boundarylessness that was created as a result of having transcendent experiences. In order to become one with something, you must drop your sense of self. A drop of rain falling into the ocean becomes the ocean, right? That is part of our desire for unification with experiences of love and relationship. We want to be completely absorbed in the mystique of the energy being exchanged between self and other.
Mm-hmm.
It's a beautiful thing. It talks about, it speaks to our desire to not only want to relate to one another as human beings, but all of life on the planet. It is part of the what shall I call attributes of the self-actualized person, according to Maslow's studies. When they got to the top of the pyramid, one of the attributes of the self-actualized is they got all their needs met through, applying consciousness in that certain direction,
Mm-hmm.
and they realized that there's a connectedness to all things. Same thing that Jung talked about with regards to synchronicity and the interconnectedness of things. Same thing the mystics have talked about forever. Part of that is the cessation of boundaries, part of that training. In mystical circles, they talk about the dropping of the ego in order to experience the transcendent. I mean, literally, what are you transcending? You're transcending your personal sense of self and the ego in order to experience something greater. People who come to the Monroe Institute or came at that point in time were looking for that experience. The words in the gateway affirmation are, it begins with, I am more than my physical body. Well, that prompts a bunch of questions. Bob never really defined what that more was in his affirmation. He just went on to say, therefore, I desire to experience, expand, know, and understand the etc., etc., to control, to use that energy and energy system as may be beneficial to me and to those who follow me.
Mm-hmm.
And then he ends it with, wisdom. I'm calling upon the wisdom, guidance, and experience of those who understanding is equal to or greater than my own. All of that leads to a desire to dissolve the boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
So, pursuant to your question, I know this is a long answer. One of the things that I found that was not helpful in Bob's work was the secession of boundaries. It was never intended by Bob to do that,
Mm-hmm.
right? But that is the way it was understood by those who came to have the experience. I maintain that the ego is not the bad guy in the story of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
The ego is both the antagonist and the protagonist in the story of
Indeed.
consciousness.
I agree.
And it is necessary to come to terms with the fact that you are an ego and that the ego was in many, many ways constructed and formed through the information you were given and the way that you interpreted information. That's how an ego becomes an ego, right?
Yes.
You're told you're a beautiful human being, and ergo you reflect beauty. You're told you are an intelligent human being, and ergo you reflect intelligence. You're told the opposite, and you reflect those things. All
Mm-hmm.
right. That's an important aspect of consciousness to become aware of.
Mm-hmm.
And it forms your ego personality structure,
Mm-hmm.
which, as I said before, is quite malleable.
Yeah.
It can be re educated if explored. You have
Yes.
to find where those thresholds are.
Mm-hmm.
And those thresholds can be expanded, not dissolved, but expanded. Yes, there's a layer of me that's here, and there's a layer of me that's here, and there's a layer of me that's here. And like the Russian doll, there are layers upon layers that lead within. So, to answer your question in a very short phrase, state chasing.
Mm-hmm.
I did not want to promote state chasing. I wanted to promote self realization and then to use those energies and energy systems as may be beneficial to me and those who follow me, consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
in constructive ways to help people self actualize.
Mm.
Very much like what we were talking about earlier with psychocybernetics, Silva mind control,
Mm-hmm.
the interaction with the field that was revealed in the CIA document, putting information out there, which could be called the law of attraction. And in some circles it is, but
Yeah.
it's not thy will be done.
Mm-hmm.
It is an interactive process
Mm-hmm.
with all I have to offer is a field
Mm-hmm.
that is essentially neutral,
Mm-hmm.
but vibrationally responsive.
Mm-hmm.
And when it's contained in a smaller sphere of influence, it seems to have greater, more immediate impact.
Mm-hmm.
In Kabbalah, that's referred to as the cube of space,
Mm-hmm.
which we don't need to get into the long explanation, but basically it's creating a container for the focus of consciousness, a barrier,
Mm-hmm.
which is literally a three-dimensional cube, to hold the consciousness that you're putting out there, your
Mm-hmm.
desire, your vibration, putting
Mm-hmm.
it out there and allowing, and this is very yin, the wisdom of whatever else is interacting with that
Mm-hmm.
field to find a matching component to harmonize with,
Yes.
not cancel each other out,
Yeah.
but be the third or the fifth to the root, to
Mm-hmm.
speak musically.
Mm-hmm.
Work within tandem. That's how you can create reality
Mm-hmm.
in a nutshell. That's why the triad mind is not about just exploring altered states for self realization, but using altered states
Mm-hmm.
for creating what it is that you're trying
Yeah.
to create without getting into a lot of new
Yeah.
age fluff.
Yeah. It's an amazing realm. I mean, just what you described, it seems to me that is the realm of all that is known and yet to be known.
Correct.
I love that.
And the good
That's
news is there's
cool.
nothing you can know that isn't already known. It
Yes.
lives somewhere in that field.
Mm-hmm.
The mystics and Edgar Casey referred to it as the Akashic records.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like every possibility or potential already lives in some, what the quantum theorists call Hilbert space, a theoretical space where
Yes.
packets of information can be accessed
Mm-hmm.
through wisdom,
Yes.
but you have to open to it.
Yeah.
Well, how do you do that without a container to hold that
Yeah.
wisdom? You
Yeah.
need the ego. It is the protagonist in the story.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to get to that place where you have to meet the antagonistic forces that will present themselves to unlearn what you have learned through
Mm-hmm.
the information that formed your ego.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a process, and it's very much a process of
That is
unfolding.
cool.
Yeah, I wish I invented it, but I didn't. It's just a reality that has presented itself
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in myriad forms throughout the ages. It's
Yeah.
part of the story of
Yeah.
consciousness.
Yeah. Well,
I
and it's
just use
happening right now. It's being reflected in the sort of a war that's going on in pop culture, poop culture. That's what I call it.
poop
The
culture.
left, right, center paradigm of,
Excuse me.
say, the political scene right now
Hmm.
throughout the world. It
Hmm.
it's happening. So I just watch and I'm entertained and I step away from that vehicle and I move along um, because it is such a consciousness, or not a consciousness, but an energy suck to sort of get sucked into the screen of all of that. But we have to be aware of it. Um,
Oh
are you
yeah.
familiar with reality transurfing?
No, I like the term though.
So
I
reality
mean, perhaps I
transurfing.
am, but
Yeah,
go
you
ahead.
probably are, but it was brought forward by a Russian physicist named Vadim Zeland,
Hmm.
who, during the fall of the Soviet Union, was all of a sudden found himself in dire straits, like many did during
Right.
the fall, and just kind of went on this journey going down these rabbit holes and discovered a way to describe reality.
Hmm.
And without getting into that, and I can send you some things later on, without getting into that, I was introduced to it in 2004 by friends who are in Bulgaria. These are friends of mine. I've known them since I was 15. They were exchange
Hmm.
students, and I met them. I'm from San Francisco,
Hmm.
Berkeley, all that. So, during that time in the 70s and 80s, it was just quite booming with all kinds of consciousness,
Right.
human potential movement, all of that kind of BS, and I
Hmm.
I hate cults. I hate groups. Don't, because my experience is every group eventually turns into a totalitarian, yes, sycophantic nightmare, which I will not participate in. Long story short, so here I am in Bulgaria, and I'm having this moment, an existential moment where I'm kind of glitching, you know, too much information coming at me, and all different categories of things coming at me. And I was just really overwhelmed. And I see this book, it's in German, and I'm going, reality transurfing. What does that mean? So what I got out of it was so helpful in the furthering of my understanding and my ability to not be so antagonistic, and for lack of a better way to put it, not be such an asshole to myself when I don't understand things and
Hmm.
I want to get it and what's wrong with me, and that negative self-talk of I'm just not smart enough, I don't get it. So basically the reality, especially when we're interfacing with what I call the matrix world, the world out here, and then my reaction in my head to the world out here, and that neutral consciousness, which is in between the outer screen and the inner screen, right here, is the center screen. This is where we create. This is that zone of all that is known and yet to be known. And one of the things that I love about what was it that what was the quote? Did I write it down? Um, the truth is found within, because this is where it's at. This is where we create. We can't be enmeshed in the outer screen, and we can't be tripping out in here. It has to be here, that place of neutrality. And that is just so fun to me. And what you're describing, that is it right there. And it's not even a concept. It's the superpower space. And you can make it friendly or not so friendly, depending on your what is it mindset?
Sure.
Yeah. It's hard to.
Believe it or not, that is, and a lot of people don't even get to this place, right? They get immersed. That is a baseline for creation,
Mhm,
for self knowledge.
mhm,
It sits at the base of the pillars of the tree of life,
mhm,
what they call the hermetic path, which is on the left hand path, and the orphic path, which is the right hand path.
mhm, mhm.
The Hebrew words, I can bore you with them if you like, are hod and netzach. Hod meaning reverberation,
Yes.
and netzach meaning glory.
Mhm,
Those are basically hidden names. What they speak to is logic and proportion
mhm,
against emotion and immersion.
mhm. Wow.
Okay. That's on a very psychic level, which the Kabbalists refer to as the world of formation, the Hebrew word being yitzira, right?
Mhm,
And how that overlaps with the world of action,
mhm,
which the Hebrew word is refers to that, or the Hebrew word for that is asiya, the world of
mhm,
action. The implication of that teaching is that you have a world that is outside, exactly what you were referring to, which is hitting you with information. How you respond to that information may be logical or
mhm,
emotional,
mhm,
may be proportional, or what might be referred to as interactive and irrational, to
mhm,
participate in such a way that it becomes a part of you, both of which inform, and they are at the base of the two side pillars, connect to what is referred to as yesod, which means foundation.
mhm,
Its secret name is the subconscious mind. Its secret name, but the word foundation
mhm.
speaks to something there.
Yes.
If I can feed your subconscious mind with things that bypass information, that bypasses your irrational or rational versus emotional, I feed the subconscious. If I can resonate with your logical sense or your emotional or irrational or, just willingness to participate without any logic whatsoever, I feed the subconscious. Getting past that
Mhm,
is hard.
mhm,
Why? Because it's part of your foundation. The
mhm.
foundation of what? The ego.
Yeah.
The aspect of self that you don't even know really exists.
Mhm,
Nobody walks around and thinks about the nature of being and how it came to being. We just are in the world.
mhm,
Yet this energy, this, I want to call it a dynamo, is moving and propagating out into the world continually and interacting with other egos to create the cacophony that we see today.
mhm,
Imagine, and I think you can, what happens when you bypass all of that, discover how that dynamic actually works in that triadic foundation,
mhm,
move above that, and relate to others who also have a sense of sovereignty over that subconscious program
mhm. Yeah.
with intention to not only align with each other, but also to align with a greater wisdom that actually exists beyond
Hmm.
that sphere of
Yes.
formation,
Oh, yeah.
because that is power.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is power. That's how you take a shit soup and make a bouillabaisse.
Yes.
And
Yes.
you're not doing it alone.
Yeah.
You can do it alone.
You
You know,
can
you
do
can
it
create
alone, but it's much more fun when you have allies, friends.
and it has
I'm
global.
blessed. I have a community of people. It's not a big community,
Excuse me.
but
Mhm.
it is. I can have these conversations, just like the conversation that I'm having with you. Very, very rare. Not everybody can do it, and I'm blessed. I have those people, and they have me, and we're scattered. We're scattered all over the world. Um,
I understand.
yeah.
I sat as a solo act with these thoughts for most of my life. And then
Mm.
all of a sudden, I got a phone call from a guy named Bob Monroe, and I found myself completely immersed. They came to me. I had no idea. I couldn't have made that happen, Maria.
What was that like for you? Like,
At first, I thought I had walked into some kind of strange cult. I mean, I was literally. Okay. So I had been involved, as I revealed earlier, in meditation and trying to create my reality. And I'd managed to do so with varying degrees of success. And I was happy. And then all of a sudden, I get this phone call, and I meet this fellow who's, is kind of like me, but an older version of me, and he's got this lab and recording studio, which was an awful recording studio, by the way. It's the world's worst recording, horrible reflections, built of Radio Shack equipment. I mean, he allowed me free reign to redesign it and make it more professional, which I thought was rather nice and trusting of him. But I was in the lab. There were at any given time 3 to 4 people who were there primarily, and then we'd have all these visiting clinicians, psychologists, psychiatrists, MDs, involved neurologists. I mean, the large gamut. Those were the people I was surrounded by. Now, the first series that I made for Bob was a series called H plus, which, as I was describing to you earlier, used the hypnagogic state as a means of a platform to not really examine subconscious content.
mhm.
It didn't bubble up, right? He would take you a little bit higher after that so that you could use what faculties you had, logical and desires, to implant or subvert a lot
Ah.
of this. The theory at the time was if you've subverted bad information or malcontent, we'll call that,
Mhm.
with positive, affirming, life affirming content, the malcontent would bubble up and dissipate.
Mhm.
Kind of like what they believed about affirmations in the 80s and early 90s. Remember the
Yes.
Saturday Night Live skit with
Yeah,
Al
I
Franken
do.
sit there and go, yeah, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me.
People like me.
Doesn't really work, right?
No, it
But
doesn't.
but that was the prevailing thought at the time. So anyway, to answer your question, that just kind of sets up the stage. Now
Mhm.
I'm there for about a year, and I would walk out because I smoke cigarettes. I like them. I don't care about anybody's judgments.
Good for
I
you.
I just don't. And I'd
Right
walk outside and I'd go have a cigarette, and I'd see people who were in these other buildings in the Gateway experience walking around the grounds. They were doing a silent walk. Now, I didn't really know what was going on in those other buildings. I just knew what was going on in my building. And I, they kind of looked like, I don't know, Night of the Living Dead, just kind of walking around contemplating. I didn't know what it was about until later. As time went on and I became more involved in the reverse engineering of EEG readings of people who were talented subjects in, various psychic phenomenon,
on.
who would go into the booth and allow themselves to be wired up, and we had a very sophisticated EEG. We'd feed them signals, and we'd watch the feedback, or they'd be involved in what they were doing naturally, and we'd watch those and reverse engineer those
Mm-hmm.
into signals that were like kind. I started to realize that what we were doing was this wonderful blend of psi, and psi, sci,
Mm-hmm.
in trying to understand not only just the mechanisms of consciousness, but the implications of what can be done with focus or, conversely,
Mm-hmm.
relaxed and open consciousness. The differences are, I think, palpable enough for most people to understand. Psychic receives information,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's an open source of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
A remote viewer is a psychic and they receive information.
Mm-hmm.
They don't make stuff up, they don't
Mm-hmm.
put stuff out in the field. Other people do. Normal people, quote unquote, use
Mm-hmm.
use the field all the time. If I want to, I don't know, do something as mundane as reach over and grab this glass and take a sip, it's a force of will,
Mm-hmm.
right? That is mostly unconscious force of will. So, simple answer to your question, it was like walking into Disney World and actually having it reflect aspects of me, which I was not aware of.
Wow.
I mean, literally, I could take it that personally. I was like, holy shit, I never really thought about my thinking in such a way, even though I had meditated
Mm-hmm.
for, about a
Yeah.
dozen, 10 years by that point in time, easily, and use it to get rid of that, psychic garbage that was my own self doubt
Yeah.
and apply it to achieving my goals. I was, introduced to a whole different perspective of flow that was more yin oriented, that was less controlling,
Mm-hmm.
that allowed me to neutralize things and aspects of myself which were more proactive. I learned patience and I learned a lot about doubt.
Wow.
Those two at the top two that were
Mm-hmm.
part of my
Mm-hmm.
list, right?
Yeah.
They're still part of my struggle, but I'm well aware that they exist.
Mm-hmm.
And when they show up, I go, oh, I see. Hi.
Wow. And you
Yeah.
and you were 27, 28, 29 around this
I
time?
was. Yeah.
What a
Yeah.
great Saturn return
Right.
astrologically.
And
Holy moly. Me too.
yeah, it precipitated the dissolution of many things in my life, including my marriage at the time.
Mm-hmm.
By the time I was 29 years old, my then wife and I were like constantly at odds, but I
Mm-hmm.
didn't have the awareness
Mm-hmm.
to be able to balance that out.
Yeah.
It was an expansion and a contraction that couldn't be understood by
Yeah.
me or
Yeah.
my partner at the
Yeah.
time. We're friends, but it's part of precipitated a journey. It's like the tarot card of the fool. You're walking on the edge of something with your eye on the horizon
Yeah.
there. And meanwhile, you got this little dog barking at your heels there, trying to say, hey, idiot, you don't want to go falling off that edge.
Yeah.
That's
Look
supposed to
out.
be
It's
the
a
wisdom.
slippery slope.
Right, exactly. And there's a reason for this, and you need to
Mm-hmm.
take care. So that would be that's another thing that I wanted
Yeah.
to make sure I did with the triad mind was to
Mm-hmm.
take this process very slowly.
Mm-hmm.
It is what we both understand behind the phrase of the great work. It's a personal self transformation that
Mm-hmm.
changes things globally.
Yeah.
It is an alchemical process, and it's not done through any ritual other than taking these little heroes' journeys that are
Mm-hmm.
step by step, and slow. I don't want anybody tripping
Yeah,
fuses
because
or,
it could easily happen.
oh, yeah, absolutely. I've seen it happen. People would come to the gateway and have an amazing transformative, I don't know, Kundalini type experience and realize they're going home, they're getting a divorce, and they're going to hate their kids and,
Mhm.
just let go
Yeah,
of
it's
everything. And,
exactly. They're gonna
yeah,
think everybody has gone insane.
right,
Yeah,
right.
certainly.
So, we all have our versions of awakening.
Yeah.
And I like to think that awakening can be a slow, gentle
Mhm.
process for
Yeah.
many if care is taken. So
Hmm.
that's what I try to do with the
Yeah.
Triad mind.
That's so
Trent,
cool. That's so cool. When does the
well,
podcast launch? Like,
what a
has
great
it launched
question.
already? Yeah, because I love the other one.
The Expanding on Consciousness
Yeah,
podcast.
yeah.
Well, I have begun to do interviews. As a matter
Right.
of fact, if you would like to be interviewed, I'd love
I
to have
love
you
that.
as a guest. Right. Um, and the answer is I need to finish the second program, the second
Okay.
stage of the program before I launch it. I am in production now, and I'm long past the need to drive myself into exhaustion to get things done to meet other people's
Oh, I
expectations,
hear
let
you.
alone
I
my own.
hear you. I hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And,
good for
you
you.
know, well, I'm 64 this coming July.
Mhm,
I'm
mhm.
probably going to retire from the consciousness space by
Yes.
the time I hit 67. I
Yeah.
don't want, I've spent the majority of my life in this space, right? For me, it's old hat. I mean, it's ever evolving, ever
Yes.
changing. I learn new things for
Yes.
me, but to teach, to do the
Oh,
research, do all the, it's
it's
all
a
part.
lot. It's a lot. I
Yeah.
don't have that push because I know I have been like, kind of pushy. And yeah, that's the thing. You get in your 60s, I've got Medicare. I'm of that age, and that was a fascinating thing. You talk about going into, like, I thought I had walked into Night of the Living Dead, literally, when I went to this Medicare orientation last year for those of us who were, gonna be 65, and here it was. I walk in and I'm like, what happened? These are my peers. And it was literally a room filled with zombies my age, some younger, some a little older, in walkers, barely walking,
Mhm.
and here I am, I'm just like, wow, this is,
Doesn't feel like a reflection of you, did it?
no, 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 no,
I
not at
understand.
all. And it
Well, you
was,
wear it very well, first of all. I mean, you
thank you.
look 15 years younger, at least.
It was astounding and it scared me. It really scared me because I realized, wow, these are a lot of them are recent retirees. And I just remember hearing this one conversation between these two ladies that talked about how much they hated their jobs and 30 years at this job and I'm finally out and I'm like, and all the medications and they were comparing meds and had them on. I was just like, all right, I think I've seen enough. And I just walked out. I just walked out. It's like, no, this is a downer.
So you got your orientation to the point where you understood where it was all about. But now you have your Medicare and you don't have to worry about
Yeah,
it,
I'm
right?
just like, yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I'm gonna stay healthy and just not be a part of that system.
Indeed, indeed.
I just want to use my time, the remaining time that I have after a certain point, to do something else.
Mm,
When I was a kid, I was solely focused on becoming a musician. That was my sole raison d'etre. It was who I was. It wasn't, what I wanted to do. It was who I was. Anything else was unacceptable. So that worked out, right? That's nice. Force of will, lots of practice, putting yourself in uncomfortable situations. I don't have
hmm.
to tell you. But Bob Monroe called me and I found a place for all of that talent in a new environment that I could not have created. I've enjoyed that for almost 40 years.
Hmm.
It's been a real blessing. And I'm not that. Right? I mean, I'm doing a lot more YouTube channels and putting myself out there in the world and I'm no longer just the lab technician doing all the techno things that I did.
Hmm.
Now I'm actually talking, I'm teaching, quote unquote. I consider myself more of a tour guide than a teacher.
That
But that's
that's
just
a cool way to put it. Really.
it's just my comfort zone. What do I have to teach that you can't find inside of yourself? My job is to take you to where you need to go find it and say, hey, we're on a tour of
Yeah.
consciousness. You see
Yeah.
that structure
Yeah.
over there? Go take a look in there and tell me what you got. I'll be here. I'll
Yeah.
just sit here on the bus,
Yeah.
waiting for you. But I've been doing that for 40 years almost. I think it's time to let it go, put it in the hands of younger people who are very
Mhm.
enthusiastic,
Indeed.
give them the tools they need to do this, maybe even teach a few people to do what it is that I do so the tradition can carry on. And my wife and I are having a greenhouse installed in our backyard so that I don't know, I'll learn how to grow tomatoes and maybe make guitars and give them
Ooh.
and teach kids, give them to kids who can't afford guitars, things
Mhm.
like that. Just be is kind of, and see what emerges.
Mhm.
I'll never stop doing my work. I'll just stop doing that work helping other people, being a
Yes.
tour guide.
Yes. Yeah.
But you carry on. I love the way that I love your approach. You carry on for as long as it inspires you.
Yes. And then I've gotta be uh out there poking things with a red hot stick. Owning the archetype of provocateur was really just kind of life changing
Mm,
in that I don't see myself as a troublemaker anymore. I don't see myself, I'll comedically name that, but I don't see it that way. I really want my desire is for all of us to be able to hold polar opposite views in one sitting and not melt down, and to have a heart opening experience of compassion, of love and appreciation for an opposing view, for a little igniting perhaps of more truth, because there is personal truth, but then there's the absolute truth and it's knowable. We have to want to check it out, even if it blows up in our face and tells us that we are not quite who we think we are.
there's a value in the antagonist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In the Kabbalah, I'm trying to remember they called the center pillar the path of consciousness
Mm-hmm.
and the path of the arrow.
Ah,
In that dynamic that I was talking about earlier, and this is all a metaphor for something greater, that psychic tension can actually be used if provoked or invoked or respected and held in such a way like the what they call the divine masculine, divine feminine, the Shiva Shakti
mm-hmm.
Parvati
Mm-hmm.
relationship,
Yes.
whatever the pole structure is. If you can create enough tension, think of it like the arc of a bow.
Mm-hmm.
You pull on that
Mm-hmm.
string, and that tension
Yeah.
now is palpable. If you don't release it, it'll break you,
Yes.
right? You
Yeah.
have to
Well.
really, if you focus it with a target and an arrow that
Mm-hmm.
which is focused consciousness and then release it,
Mm-hmm.
the more velocity will be will be sent through the time space
Mm-hmm.
to reach your target
Mm-hmm.
quicker.
Yes. Yeah.
So it has value,
Yeah.
antagonism.
Yeah.
um, provocative, being provocative has value,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't have to define you.
No.
If you use it like a tool, it can work.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's a
Yep.
narrow edged sword, though, right? Or
Yes.
blade. And, you
Indeed.
got to know where somebody is
Indeed.
and
Yeah.
where their threshold is. But I think you're going to do beautifully. So have at it. But I hear that you no longer want to do that.
Well,
You found something
I'm
else.
in a transition. I'm in a transition. I'm
Excuse me.
not quite sure what it looks like. Um, and there's still a lot to share,
Mm-hmm.
and to share it in a way that is really, I think, honoring of our vulnerabilities, and also honoring our capacity to transcend, to
Mm-hmm.
evolve,
Mm-hmm.
honoring the capacity to actually take responsibility for sovereignty, because sovereignty has immense responsibility. It has
Yes.
consequences.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get to default to um, unhealthy stuff.
And you have to define the boundaries of the territory of which you
Mhm.
are sovereign. Otherwise,
Indeed,
you don't have a country, right?
indeed,
And
indeed.
that country is self,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
which brings us full circle with that whole construct about the ego.
Yes,
So,
yes.
so it's a big mystery to be solved. It won't be solved within my lifetime. My work is just, has always been a contribution to a much
Hmm.
larger conversation.
Yes, yes. Mine as well. Mine as well.
I'm, I
Get
feel
it.
blessed to have been part of that. I really do.
Yeah.
I don't want to be known for it. I hope, quite frankly, I hope I'm forgotten 100 years from now. I don't want anybody remembering me. Let that guy go. Yeah. But AI already knows who I am. If you
Hmm.
ask AI who I am, it presents me as a consciousness researcher and explorer and teacher and all that. I'm like, shit, how did that happen?
How
Maybe
did that
20 years from
happen?
now. Yeah,
Oh
right.
my
20 years
God.
from now, I'll hopefully be gone and there'll be a hologram of me teaching through, informed through AI
Yeah,
or
yeah.
not.
Well, AI will absolutely do that. It's already
Information,
being
yeah,
done.
right. And it's part of that information process that I have concerns about.
Hmm.
Sovereignty
Yes.
is the answer. Cooperation through compassion
Hmm.
is the answer.
Hmm.
Unity of the aspects of self and relationship to them,
Hmm.
your personal consciousness to those aspects and to each other.
Yeah.
And all of that is, in my opinion, vibrational in its roots and essence. So maybe if we all learn how to play music, we can learn how to harmonize together.
Here, 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 here.
And there's an answer.
I love that. I love that.
Keep up the good work, is all I
You
can
as
say.
well. I'm looking at our time, and I think we're coming to a natural close here.
Works for me.
Yeah,
It's
works for me. Um, do you have any parting words of wisdom before we close?
do the work and honor that part of you that wants to do the work.
Hmm.
Ask yourself, what is my motivation? Because it's going to
Yes.
take some motivation.
Yes.
That's,
Beautiful.
I don't know if that's a word of wisdom, but it's my experience that
Yeah.
helped me get from point A to point wherever I am right now, which
Yeah.
is beyond point B anyway.
Yeah.
And it wasn't always an easy ride, but I
Hmm.
don't care about easy. I like exercise, you know.
Yeah, I get that.
I like doing my scales to a metronome. I like discipline. My
That's
relationship to
awesome. I
discipline
did
is
that
changed.
too. As a musician, and
Mm-hmm.
also as a martial artist. It's all
Mm-hmm.
repetition.
That's right. Kata is important.
Mhm.
Discipline is important.
Yeah.
If you struggle with it, ask yourself, what's your relationship to discipline?
Hmm.
You'll probably find that there's some harsh shit around it that
Yeah.
needs to be revisited and say, oh, but that's
No
old,
doubt. Yeah.
right? I don't need to be harsh in my discipline. I just need to be a disciple of this particular Tao.
Oh, yeah.
And I love music.
That's a good way to put it. To
Well, you
be a
mean disciple as
disciple.
opposed to disciplinarian?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it helps me
Yeah.
reframe. Yeah. Because nobody likes discipline. Who wants to be beat up
I don't. I've had
or
enough.
yelled at? Yeah,
I've
right.
had
I'm not a
enough.
masochist. No.
I don't like yelling. I don't like it. So that being said, it has been a pleasure, such a pleasure spending time with you. And
Pleasure's been mine. I'll,
I'm so thrilled. I'm so thrilled. And I will have all of Mark's information in the show notes below.
that's right. I don't have a lot of information that you can't find on the triadmind.com. There's the
Yeah.
plug.
Yeah. It's a beautiful, beautiful space. Lots of really wonderful, wonderful teachings. Go there, kids. Go there.
If you have questions or comments, you can leave them on this YouTube channel. I'm happy to pay attention and try to answer in the best way that I can. And I look forward to having you on my podcast, which will come
Thank you.
probably after mid-May when I
Okay.
finish my
Awesome.
discipline work.
Awesome.
All
I
right.
look forward to that. All right, my darlings,
You
that
take good care.
is our show for today. And so until we meet, here is to love, truth, and beauty. Mwah. Bye, love, bye.
Bye.
Bye.